You're watching News at Prime. When you think of a top bank executive, the image that comes to mind is possibly of a person whose demeanour is unapproachable. Their attire will have you wondering, I wish I could see their bank balance. Well, my Leadership Thursday guest this evening is anything but the description I've just painted above, and so is his climb up the corporate ladder. Ciko Thomas is Nedbank's Group Managing Executive for Retail and Business Banking. I began by asking him about his memories of childhood.
That's the background where I grew up. You know, it's not untypical of young black South Africans to be brought up by extended family, and in many ways, I spent a large part of my early life being brought up by my grandparents. On my mother's side in Somerset East, there were farm laborers and there were people who worked the land, and there were byproducts of a system of land displacement who had never left the farms that traditionally they'd come from. So a deep value set and a deep love for the land, and just incredibly wonderful people. Generous in spirit, and generous in inner health and wealth. So you grow up in this environment that is characterized by calmness and just pure happiness. As a child, we played, we worked hard, we chased sheep, and you know, we plucked mealies and plants from the soil, but it was a happy, happy childhood. And similarly, growing up in a township in New Brighton in Gqeberha, equally, that was wonderful because a large part of my early friendships, going to school, because I went to school in New Brighton, Kamaloa Primary School, that's where I started, taught by a wonderful teacher system, you know, who were like mothers, nurturers to us. And that's what I know. So I know the system of people who care for the young and who make you happy as children. Yeah.
General Motors is the company, as we say, your parents worked for. But the company disinvests from South Africa, it leaves, and that means that both your parents are out of work. Explain to us how old you were, first of all, and how that disruption affects your family life and also, importantly, your schooling.
Yeah. You know, I suppose coming from Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth then, the car industry is a vital part of the economy of those parts. And both my parents worked in the value chain of the motor industry. So when sanctions started hitting and this company started disinvesting from South Africa, it had a direct impact on the households. My father and my mother both lost their jobs in the car industry, and it changed a lot of my early childhood. We had a typical township upbringing, comfortable, you know, and, you know, I always talk of poverty in relative terms. Poverty is relative, right? If you as a child, you know, and I'm talking, you asked me earlier on how old I was probably around 10, 11 at the time all of this was starting to happen. And, but I've had a very happy childhood. I've known nothing else but the security of a family and a happy childhood and parents who cared and nurtured and provided for us. Now they're without a job. And things are harder to get. Things are more difficult to get, etc., etc. So that's the kind of first thing that you saw, not only with our family, but also with the extended community as well. Eventually,
you complete matric, and that year after matric, you find yourself at St. Andrew's College. This is in Grahamstown. This is the period when you also get your big break, which comes along. I don't want to say what that is because you are narrating this, so you're going to tell us what that big break was and what happens next.
Yeah, so you know, we're talking late 80s here. We out of school. There's school boycotts. It's tough in the communities. There's, you know, the economies have collapsed in the townships where we've grown up. There's no schooling activity happening. And I find myself with an opportunity to go to a private school. I was okay as a child at school, you know. My teachers used to describe me as quite a diligent student. And so I was determined to provide continuity in my high school education. I found myself in Grahamstown. I hustled my way into St. Andrews College, and I got in and I was accepted. And
what do you mean you hustled your way in?
I literally went to present myself to the headmaster's office and said I need to complete high school. You know, and the school arranged for scholarships for me, scholarship entrances, and I got into the school, and that's how I finished high school.
You've got to explain this. Where are the parents? Are you doing this of your own volition?
So I told them that my friends and I are going to Grahamstown. Grahamstown is 120 kilometers away from where I grew up. And so off the back of that, I hadn't informed anyone much. I'd kind of hashed this in my head, and I, you know, would kind of hitchhiked myself and a friend of mine, a guy called Boy Sogoni, we'd kind of done this. He had family in Grahamstown. And that's how I got to, and a lady who knew the Sogonis in Grahamstown worked at the school as a staff member. She worked in the catering facility. I rode on her pigtails the one day she was going to school, and that's how I negotiated and wrangled myself into Arthur Cotton's office, who was the headmaster at the time.
And then a scholarship comes along.
Then a scholarship comes up.
Talk to us about that.
No, so you know, the school was generous. It's an expensive school, right? So no one in my immediate circle could afford the fees that went into that. And the school was very generous in making sure that I had scholarships arranged for me to complete high school and do that and complete my education at St. Andrews. And that scholarship continued into university. It's a scholarship that, you know, if you kind of pass well, you matric and, you know, you finished with a little bit of blaze, you can go into university. And that's what got me into university. That's how I was able to get into university.
You're now in university, but you make a deliberate decision not to go into the arts environment, Bachelor of Arts degree. And you've got to explain that to us. What was the avoidance about? Why is it that you felt you couldn't take a Bachelor of Arts degree? It needed to be something else.
It's funny, you know, Xoli, a part of it was a no option, right? Because the scholarship that I got, I could either do commerce or science.
Yeah.
Actually, commerce, science, engineering, any one of those three. So the arts were not an immediate option that was available to me. Right? I didn't mind science. I was quite proficient at it. I'd gotten good marks for it in high school. So, but the funny thing, you know, a little bit where kind of you are, I had no role models who said, this is what you study at university. No one in my immediate family had gone to university.
Career
this
guidance,
thing is foreign to me. There's none of that, you know? So there was a little bit of what the guys that had gone to school with had studied. And there were a couple of guys who were going to UCT, and we kind of checked each other out and said, what are you studying? What are you studying? A couple of the guys were doing commerce. A couple of the guys were going to kind of science and engineering school. And I went, didn't study accounting. It's not an option for me. Let's go the science route. But the arts was never an option. But also being backed by a scholarship made it easy for me, because I could either go this way or that way, right?
Yeah.
So that's what informed a large part of my early thinking behind me finding myself registering for a science degree at university.
But I read somewhere as well that part of this was you wanted to start earning money ASAP.
That's the big
What
other
was
thing.
that about?
Correct. So, you know, in my own mind, you know, the option of fiddling around, studying, I didn't have the luxury. Coming where I came from, I needed to help my family immediately. I needed to get into a bankable degree, into a commercializable degree as soon as possible. So that was always something I had in my mind, you know, that I'm going to get into varsity, study something that on completion could get me a job immediately, you know. So that informed a big part of why I made the choice around studying science. Science was sellable.
So you graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree, but your entry into work life is something completely different. You are now a marketer starting out at Unilever. How does that come about?
Complete coincidence again. You know, I've had this series of coincidences in my professional life, which have shaped who I am in many ways. So I'm at varsity. I've got application forms for Unilever. A mate of mine, it's a Friday afternoon, a mate of mine had left at the lab, very diligent chap, was a deep friend of mine to this day. A guy called David Power. He's actually a professor of chemistry at Wits. Yeah. Dave had given me his forms to hand over to the Unilever guys. I'd taken these forms, hand them over to the Unilever guys, on my way to, I don't know, I was probably going drinking somewhere, I suppose, or to hang out with friends. The guy from Unilever looks at these forms and says, geez, these are amazing marks. I was like, sir, those are not mine. You know, those forms are for a mate of mine who was at the lab being busy doing something. I can't claim credit for them. These are not mine. And then he says, tell me about this friend of yours. I tell him about David, and he says, you do such an amazing job. Are you always this generous in describing your friends? And that's how we got into a conversation with this gentleman called Eric Glazer, who was from the HR department at Unilever, who proceeded to sell me the idea of me applying to get into Unilever. So that's how I started the conversation with Unilever. And then he started talking to me about Unilever and their history of recruiting brilliant world-class marketers.
Yeah.
I didn't know what marketers do. In my mind, marketers sold things. So he started saying, you know, think about a career in marketing. Go and find this textbook, or go and find the Philip Kotler textbook back on campus. I studied back to front over the weekend, and then I started interviewing with them, and that's how I found myself in a marketing career at Unilever.
So in a moment, we are going to get into that life, therefore, as a senior marketing executive, because you've moved literally from one company to the next, but it's very senior leadership positions. But we need to take a pause, so let's take a break. When we return, we gradually work our way from entrepreneurship into leadership in corporate South Africa. The conversation continues in a moment. You're watching Leadership Thursday, and we are in conversation with Ciko Thomas. He is an executive, a big man at Netbank. We're going to get to how he got himself into this institution, but there's a way that you gradually work yourself into corporate South Africa. We're talking in big, broad strokes because your life, trying to condense it, is going to take us a day. I want to launch straight into your highest point as a senior marketing executive to your lowest point. In short, what were those periods in your life, you would say?
Yeah. I don't think there was a low point in my professional career. I've worked with interesting people, but you know, one of the things that I learned early, when you start off, I mean, I worked for Unilever in a dairy office. We sold specialty cheese in Durban. Specialty brie, camembert, blue cheese, cheeses that I'd never eaten in my life before. I found myself in the brand office in Durban, and you're in a sales job, in a job that it requires you to go and merchandise, sell. In Durban in January, it's hot, it stinks. You know, the idea that there is no fancy entry into any job market. You know, you're groveling, you're working, you're driving from an outlet in Moy River that you're calling on, taking stuff all the way to Clearwood on the other side of Durban, lugging boxes of expired rotten cheese in your car, doing it yourself. It's part of your learning. That's how you learn relationships. So there's a big part of that in what I would describe as a low point, and I don't like to describe it as a low point. It's kind of foundational. And then one works their way up, and you get, you know, you become brand manager, you become senior brand manager, you become marketing managers in quite attractive portfolios, into quite senior roles. And I mean, at some point, I kind of straight-lined, and I was a general manager of marketing for Absa, our competitor. You know, I looked after marketing for their retail business, and I was general manager for marketing for that business, which was a fascinating view into a world that up to then was completely foreign to me, banking. Reasonably senior as a marketing person, I had to learn the basics of banking, what drives the income statement, what drives customer behavior, what drives banking and people's relationship with banking. And that was a big part of what shaped me as a professional into kind of the person that I am in a professional sense today, was those learnings from low to high.
You've got to talk to us about innovation, because my understanding is that this is a passion of yours. This is how you've worked your way into the leadership positions in institutions such as Netbank, where you are now. What is it about innovation that gets you going?
I'm fascinated by the idea that if industries and businesses don't reinvent themselves, and individuals, funnily enough, your customers will reinvent your business for you. And again, it goes back to the old story. Who knew that photography today would be defined by a phone? You know, when I grew up, a phone was something that sat on the side and you dial and it made that funny noise, and the camera was something that was completely different. The two have now fused. They haven't fused, they've fused because they've been incredibly innovative people who've driven that. But customers took us there.
Yeah.
You know, customer choice took us there. Customers said, if I can take pictures with my mobile phone, why do I need a Polaroid? And that killed Polaroid as a business, and that killed the Polaroid and instant. It's come back now in the form of Instax. But instant photography was killed as a consequence of that. So for me, this obsession with how do you anticipate what customers might want that might reinvent your entire business, an entire industry into the future is something that's really, really been at the heart of the passion that I bring into business. Trying to understand that and constantly asking, how do I anticipate and what do we do as actions to make sure that we respond to that?
Let's quickly get into entrepreneurship, because the year is 2000. You've just completed your MBA, and that little voice whispers in you, start a business. What's your first enterprise venture? And do you go it alone, or is it a group of friends that decide to do this?
Yeah. So firstly, it was safety in numbers. It was a group of friends. But one of the things that I found fascinating about, in the time that I did my MBA, one of the electives, I did my electives in Rotterdam at Erasmus University. And there, I ended up mingling with a crowd from Estonia, 2000. They just found themselves coming out of what was called the Iron Curtain, re-entering the capitalist West system of trading. And all these guys were thinking about, and Estonia is a tiny country, it's a country of 3 million people. And all these guys were talking about, were starting their own businesses in different industries. And I was intrigued by that, because in my mind, in South Africa at the time, if you were graduating with an MBA, you were thinking about a big job. And these guys were thinking about forming their own businesses. So that sat at the top of my mind. And one of the guys I started doing business with, one of the things that he said, it was like, Mfowethu, when we go back to South Africa, we must start our own business, man. You know, these Germans and these bloody Estonians are talking about their own businesses and we want to have big jobs. So that was the initial germ that sparked this thought. We come back to South Africa. Another mate of ours, a guy I was at varsity with and a good friend of mine, is talking about an opportunity in IT.
Yeah.
And he says that in the business that he works with, he worked with Microsoft at the time, he says there's an opportunity to buy an IT reseller business. Let's do this thing.
Yeah.
And we went to this thing. What's it talking about? We investigated, did some thorough learning, and before you know it, we're standing in front of banks, borrowing money, putting business cases, and how we grow this business. And we bought an IT business called Enterprise Connection.
Yeah.
It was 4 of us, mates, guys that were in my social group of friends, but that we shared a lot of professional ambitions with, and we started this business.
The most well-publicized business venture was taking a BMW dealership in downtown Johannesburg. Worst performer, but you take it and you turn it around and it literally rises to the top in a space of 18 months. You have to talk to us about the genius behind that. Could it possibly also have been your marketing genius at play there? How in the world did you do it?
You know, Xoli, it was a fusion of factors. I think firstly, timing was amazing. When we bought the dealership from Barloworld, Joburg City Auto, it was in Selby. It was at the back end of Selby, right at the back. And one of the things that we recognized was that we need to move it to a more central place. So we moved it to just behind ABSA's offices on Commercial Road, downtown Joburg. And I think the power of the brand, the love that people have for the brand, the timing. At the time, we're talking early 2000s, people were looking for wonderful, warm, wonderful stories. Here was a group of young black guys who had taken over the running and ownership of a BMW, the first black BMW dealership in South Africa.
Was that the key selling point, you think?
I think it was, without a doubt.
Young black people who are running what is supposed to be a German company, but of course localized. Was that part of the key selling point? Because there was such a buzz about that.
It was, you know, and a much-loved BMW, a much-loved brand in BMW as well, you know? And we were quite savvy to it at the time. We used it to our advantage. Everywhere I went, I would not hesitate to tell you Hi, I'm Ciko Thomas. I co-own Joburg City Auto. It's South Africa's first black-owned dealership. Come visit us to buy a car. Told everyone who bothered to listen, to the point of exhaustion.
You're at the peak of your career, and a call comes in from Netbank, but it's not an executive from Netbank. These are scouters. They are calling you to invite you to join the group, but you turn them down. You've got to explain that to us.
At the time, I was at an interesting point. We'd just been presented with the opportunity to participate in a broad-based BE deal with Barloworld. And part of that meant that one of the alternatives was that we needed to sell all of the businesses that we'd invested in at the time to raise some equity. There were some kind of clashes in terms of interests and conflicts of interest with owning a BMW dealership and being part of a broad-based structure, and we're keen to do the Barloworld deal. So at the time, I'm in flux. I'm in a lot of flux in terms of what the next step is going to be for me. I get this call from headhunters to say that Netbank is looking for someone, and we've been given an instruction that you are one of the 3 people that they've shortlisted. They're very keen to talk to you.
Yeah.
Come and have a conversation with us. I said, I can't. There's too much going on in my life, and I'm not ready to have that conversation. Let me settle these moving parts first and kill this noise. And probably after about 9 to 12 months, I'll know what's happening in my life. So that was the big informing decision around why I walked away from the Netbank opportunity at that time.
Okay. And then there's a gentleman, Graham Dempster. He decides to personally call you. Question is, what was the feeling like, first of all, being called by a CEO of Netbank, and did you have the guts to turn him down?
Graham looms large in my life as an inspiration.
Yeah.
So I get this call from Graham to reconsider. This is 9 months or so after I turned the job down. We have this conversation, very informal. We're sitting across the road at the Hilton Hotel, and he presents this opportunity again to me. And really it encourages me. Graham is an incredibly persuasive individual with a great manner to reconsider this conversation. And off the back of that, off the back of someone, and he promised, one of the things that was attractive to this was that you're not going to be restricted to what we're putting in front of you. The bank will give you options to learn and explode your career and the vistas of opportunity.
So what position do they want you for?
So at that time, they wanted me to run the group marketing role, group marketing and communications role. It was as group executive for marketing and communications and corporate affairs for Netbank. And that's the role I was headhunted for, and that's when I started in Netbank in kind of December 2009, Jan 2010.
And today, you are a senior exec in Netbank. What is it that you do now, moving from that point, your entry point as senior marketing exec? What do you do now?
Okay, so my official title is Group Managing Executive for Retail and Business Banking. So I look after retail and business banking, the retail and business banking cluster for the bank, which is a continuum of businesses and banking solutions that cater literally from a child who's opening their first banking account all the way to businesses that have grown themselves, built themselves over time, and are about to list as a rough tool. So these are businesses generally that have a turnover of about 2.5, 3 billion in size, there and thereabout. And we look after that entire client set. I look after the bank employs about 24,000 people. 14,500 of those roughly sit in retail and business banking. So that's kind of the business and the scope of business that I look after inside the bank.
Wow. We are rounding this up now. Life lessons. There is something special I picked up as I was doing research around this interview. And I want to circle back to your childhood. I read somewhere that your mother often showed you a picture of 5 friends. And out of that 5, there's only one person left. All of the others have since departed. You are the person that is the sole survivor. What life lesson do you draw, or what does that picture signify for you about how life has been for you?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, you probably noticed I cracked up a bit. It's an emotional picture.
I can see that, yes.
These are childhood friends of mine,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, without fail, most of them died kind of tragically, you know, shot, bank robbery, died of HIV, AIDS, killed themselves, that kind of thing. And these are people I grew up with, knew as kids, grew up in families that brought me up. There's something about clarity of vision and choices you make up in life. You know, I made choices very early in my childhood that I don't want to go the route that they went.
Yeah.
You know, I want to build my life into something that is better than the circumstances I grew up in. I was always very clear about that. It helped that, and one of the things that I knew was that school and education was a pathway towards that. And it helped that I didn't do too badly at school either.
Yeah.
You know, so I kind of knew that if I hold on to this thing, it could help nudge me in the direction that I wanted to move towards. And I think a lot of the other values grew off the back of that. You know, values of focus, hard work, choosing company that you keep, making the right personal choices, and importantly, being underpinned by values in the things that you do. So I think off the back of that, a whole lot of those, you know, I can't say, you know, at the age of 9, I had this basket of values that guided me through life. No, that was not the issue. But these are things I learned along the way.
Yeah.
And so those are the lessons that I've probably learned in life.
Drawing from the very life lesson that you have just relayed, Netbank is going through something of a rough patch. There's a controversy around state capture. And I'm just wondering whether, in your educated guess, is the institution strong enough to withstand those headwinds? Do you think that there's somewhere where they took bad choices along the way, and if tomorrow you are asked to lead this institution, how would you turn it around from the potential damaging claims that are going to come from this turbulent period that's about to unfold? Yeah,
you know, Xoli, I'm part of the leadership of the bank. You know, so your question around if I was chosen, I'm at the vortex of those decisions as a leader of the bank. I think on a balance, decisions get made which have got outcomes. I think that institutions, whatever it could be a bank, it could be any other business, it could be the church. I mean, Catholic Church is under a lot of scrutiny right now. If the underlying values that shape how an institution does its work are sound, and they are built on a platform of genuine authenticity, I think on a balance of probabilities, institutions will last, and they will survive crisis as and when they face them. Because I think that institutions inevitably will face crises of some form or another. It's in what they're made out of. And I think the secret sauce to what they're made out of is a value system. It's a strong underlying value system that serves them. And I think on a balance of probabilities, as I say, if those values are sound, the institution has a much higher chance of surviving and surviving crises as and when they blow over.
Ciko Thomas, thank you very much for your time. Your story is nothing short of inspiration. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you.